The United States stands at a crossroads. Its economy, once the envy of the world, is teetering on the brink. Inflation is soaring, wages are stagnating, homelessness is rising, and the national debt is spiraling out of control. In the face of these challenges, some have turned to a familiar figure as a panacea, a man who promises to make America great again. The name Donald Trump echoes once more with vows to restore the nation's prosperity. But the hard truth is this: electing Donald Trump will not save the U.S. economy. In fact, it may very well set this supposed land of liberty on the brink of a financial mirage. To understand why, one must first confront the scale and severity of the problems the nation faces. Inflation, which erodes the purchasing power of every dollar earned, has risen to levels not seen in over 40 years. According to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index rose 9.1% in the 12 months ending June 2022, the largest increase since 1981. The cost of essentials like food, fuel, and housing is skyrocketing, squeezing household budgets and forcing many to choose between putting food on the table and keeping a roof over their heads. At the same time, wages for most Americans have remained stubbornly stagnant. A 2022 report by the Economic Policy Institute found that while productivity has increased by 61.8% since 1979, hourly compensation for typical workers has grown by just 17.5%, with the divergence beginning in the 1970s. This means that despite working harder and more efficiently, most Americans are not seeing a corresponding increase in their paychecks. In America today, many factors continue to contribute to the dwindling economy, spurring the need for a new dawn and leading many citizens to turn to Donald Trump as their beacon of hope. However, this reliance on Trump overlooks critical realities. In this video, we will delve into the harsh realities and hidden pitfalls of a Trump-led economic future. From mounting debt to trade war turbulence, discover why another term might spell disaster rather than deliverance for America's financial health. Years after Donald Trump left the confines of the White House, America is still dealing with an unstable economy he has left behind. The lingering impacts of his policies continue to ripple through the financial system, affecting both macroeconomic stability and the everyday lives of millions of Americans. Despite currently being under a liberal government, the nation struggles to mitigate the adverse effects inherited from the previous administration. The economic challenges are multifaceted. One of the most visible manifestations of this desperation is the rise in homelessness. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2022 Annual Homeless Assessment report to Congress, an estimated 582,500 people experienced homelessness in the United States on a single night in January 2022, an increase of 2,034 people from 2020. This marks the fourth consecutive year that homelessness has increased nationwide, despite efforts by local and federal governments to address the issue. But perhaps the most daunting challenge facing the U.S. economy is the ballooning national debt. As of this May, the country's public debt outstanding is at a current level of $34.62 trillion, up from $34.59 trillion last month and up from $32.46 trillion 1 year ago. This is a change of 0.09% from the previous month and 10.04% from 1 year ago. That's more than $94,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. The Congressional Budget Office projects that under current law, the federal debt held by the public will soar from 99% in 2024 to 166% of GDP in 2054, its highest level since World War II. This massive debt burden poses a significant risk to the long-term health of the U.S. economy. It can lead to higher interest rates as investors demand a greater return for the risk of lending to a heavily indebted government. It can crowd out private investment as businesses and individuals are forced to compete with the government for limited capital. It can also limit the government's ability to respond to future crises, whether a recession, a natural disaster, or a public health emergency like the COVID-19 pandemic. It's against this backdrop of economic turmoil and uncertainty that some have pinned their hopes on the return of Donald Trump to the White House. During his 2016 campaign and subsequent presidency, Trump promised to boost economic growth, create jobs, and put America first in trade and foreign policy. And while the U.S. economy did experience some gains during his tenure, including low unemployment and rising stock prices, there are reasons to be skeptical that a second Trump term would be a panacea for the nation's economic woes. One of the key reasons is that many of Trump's signature economic policies failed to address the underlying structural issues facing the U.S. economy, and in some cases may have exacerbated them. Take, for example, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which was touted by Trump and congressional Republicans as a boon for the middle class and a spur to economic growth. In reality, the bill provided the largest benefits to the wealthy wealthiest Americans and corporations, with the top 1% of earners seeing an average tax cut of over $60,000 in 2018, according to the Tax Policy Center. At the same time, the bill added an estimated $1.9 trillion to the federal deficit over a decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office, even after accounting for any economic growth generated by the tax cuts. This puts additional pressure on the federal budget and limits the government's ability to invest in areas like infrastructure, education, and healthcare, which are critical to long-term economic prosperity. Trump's trade policies, too, had mixed results at best. While he was able to secure some concessions from China and renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, now known as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or the USMCA, his tariffs on imported goods led to retaliation from trading partners and higher costs for American consumers and businesses. A 2019 study by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and Columbia University found that the tariffs cost the typical household $831 annually, while a 2020 report by the Brookings Institute estimated that they led to a net loss of 300,000 U.S. jobs. Moreover, Trump's often confrontational and belligerent approach to foreign policy and alliances strained relationships with key partners and created an atmosphere of global instability. His decisions to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, the Iran nuclear deal, and the World Health Organization, among others, isolated the United States and undermined its ability to shape global events and protect its interests. But perhaps the most significant reason to doubt that a second Trump term would save the U.S. economy is that it would do little to address the fundamental imbalance between spending and revenue that lies at the heart of the nation's fiscal woes. During his first term, despite promising to eliminate the national debt within 8 years, Trump oversaw a dramatic increase in the debt, which grew by almost $8 trillion during his presidency. This was due in part to the tax cuts and increased military spending, but also to the massive fiscal response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which included trillions in relief spending. While some level of deficit spending can be justified during times of crisis or to stimulate a sluggish economy, the current trajectory of U.S. debt is unsustainable in the long run. Without significant changes to tax and spending policies, the national debt will continue to grow as a share of the economy, putting increasing strain on the federal budget and limiting the government's ability to respond to future challenges. Unfortunately, there are no easy solutions to this problem. Bringing the debt under control will require a combination of spending cuts and revenue increases, both of which are politically difficult. It will require hard choices about priorities and a willingness to look beyond short-term political considerations to the economy's long-term health. However, it will not require a return to the policies and rhetoric of the Trump era. Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, was widely criticized for its lack of a coordinated federal response and its focus on downplaying the severity of the virus. According to a study by the Lancet Commission, the U.S. could have avoided nearly 40% of COVID-19 deaths if it had implemented a more robust and sustained response, including earlier lockdowns, universal mask wearing, and increased testing and contact tracing. The economic fallout from the pandemic was severe, with GDP contracting by 3.5% in 2020, the worst performance since the end of World War II. While the economy has since rebounded, the uneven nature of the recovery has exposed and exacerbated long-standing inequalities. Low-wage workers, particularly in the service sector, have borne the brunt of job losses, while higher-wage workers have largely been able to work from home and maintain their incomes. Trump's infrastructure policies, or lack thereof, also failed to address a critical long-term economic need. Despite repeatedly promising a major infrastructure package, his administration never delivered a comprehensive plan. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates that the U.S. faces a $2.59 trillion shortfall in infrastructure funding over the next decade, and that failing to close this gap could cost the economy $10 trillion in lost GDP by 2039. Perhaps most fundamentally, Trump lacked a cohesive long-term economic vision. His policies often seem driven more by political considerations and personal grudges than by a coherent strategy for sustainable growth. He focused on short-term wins like the stock market and quarterly GDP numbers, while neglecting the deeper structural issues plaguing the economy. For example, while Trump frequently touted the low unemployment rate during his tenure, he failed to address the underlying factors contributing to wage stagnation and income inequality. According to a 2020 report by the Rand Corporation, the median worker compensation would be over $50,000 higher today if pay had kept pace with the productivity growth since the 1970s. Similarly, while Trump's tax cuts provided a short-term boost to corporate profits and stock prices, they did little to spur long-term investments in research, development, and human capital critical for innovation and competitiveness. In fact, many companies use their tax windfalls for stock buybacks, which benefit shareholders but do not contribute to productive economic activity. Ultimately, Trump eroded democratic norms in many ways during his tenure. He repeatedly attacked the media, leading UN experts to warn that Trump's rhetoric raised the risk of violence against journalists. He threatened to deploy combat troops to American cities over the objections of their elected leaders and ordered illegal actions like demanding poll workers to stop counting ballots. Trump's relentless dissemination of disinformation on an array of topics, particularly the electoral process, led historians and experts on fascism to compare him to dictators like Benito Mussolini. Trump's lack of diplomacy would be the bane of his frivolous government on innocent citizens. For instance, weeks after rejecting the election result and attempting to overturn the outcome, the president provoked an attempted coup in the U.S. Capitol on the day lawmakers met to certify Biden's Electoral College victory. He had riled up his supporters in an inflammatory speech, urging them to march on the Capitol and fight like hell. In the aftermath, many questioned Trump's suitability as a leader. His actions were widely condemned by political figures from both parties, leading to his second impeachment by the House of Representatives. The impeachment article charged him with incitement of insurrection, highlighting the gravity of his conduct. The former president undermined the political system in the U.S. and sowed doubt about the integrity of the country's elections. Every president prior to Trump allowed for a peaceful transition of power after they'd served 2 terms or lost an election. In light of these considerations, it is clear that electing Donald Trump again will not solve the United States' economic woes. This is not hyperbole, but the stark, unvarnished truth. The great American experiment is teetering on the edge of the precipice, and the forces that would see it plunge into the void are gathering strength with each passing day. Trump's re-election will not only dither America's economic progress, it will exacerbate the country's descent into financial ruin. His reckless policies, his disdain for facts and expertise, his hollow promises of a bygone era of greatness, these will only serve to exacerbate the very problems that have brought Americans to the brink. If you like this video, hit the like button and help us spread the word. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications on our latest news and analysis. In the meantime, check out one of these videos here to learn more. Thanks for watching.